Test, test. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to NorthStar Community, our online service. And we're just so happy to be here. And I have Lisa sitting beside me today. And we're going to be talking about boundaries today. Before we do that, though, I'd like to mention a couple things. First of all, we meet on Fridays. If you're here locally, we meet on Fridays. And if you are to come to our meeting, you can dress casually. You don't have to worry about how you're dressed. You don't have to eat before you come because we feed you. And I'm not talking about simple little hors d'oeuvres. We're talking about a full meal. And I think I heard we're going to be doing BLTs this next week. And you can come, you're welcome, you're supported. The problem with us when we're in recovery, it's easy for us to really dislike ourselves. And we all know that one. And it's easy to think that we're the only ones out there that have this stuff going on in our lives. And when you come to NorthStar or AA or any of those other meetings, what you come to learn is you're not alone. And of course, we're not happy. Everybody else is going through the same stuff, but it's good to hear you're not alone. Yeah. And then we talk so much in there about the effects of trauma and abandonment on our lives. And I always tell people I have yet to meet someone who is going through recovery that has not had some form of trauma or abandonment. And to actually be honest with you, a lot of the trauma abandonment I've seen has been pretty significant, actually. So it takes courage to step out and start to live your life again when you have learned to survive so long. So at NorthStar Community, one of our definitions we use for addiction is habitual behavior to avoid pain. And that really makes sense when you think about the trauma and abandonment levels in so many of our lives. So anyway, we meet on Fridays go around the back of the church, go through the double glass doors. You'll see us from there. Or if not, you'll smell the food that Stan's making. If you can't do that, of course, we have our online service on Sundays, but you can watch that anytime. We're now both on Walnut Grove Facebook and on Walnut Grove's YouTube channel. So please, at any time, watch us. And also, if you know other people out there, share that with other people, because we know people are hurting. And for you that are in recovery, we know how one of our biggest temptations is to isolate. And this is one way of helping us to maybe isolate a little bit healthier, is to have some information for you. So when we talk about addiction at NorthStar, we break it into 3 categories. We break it into substances, which most of us understand. We get that. We all either know ourselves are abusing and have become powerless to alcohol, cocaine, heroin, meth, whatever it is. We all understand that one. The ones that are a little less understood, I think, are the compulsive behaviors. But if you think about it, they can be ever as destructive as substances. And I've known people who've wrecked their lives because of gambling or pornography or shopping or Facebook likes. I mean, people can destroy their lives sometimes with they just can't help themselves. And of course, the compulsive behaviors also kind of leads into the other one, which is people. We become addicted to people. And that's probably what we're going to talk about today, really think about it. Boundaries are a lot about being addicted to people. But it all gets back to the same subject, is we really come to loathe ourselves. We really do hate ourselves when we're in recovery or before recovery, because we just have done so many things destructive, both to ourselves and others. I always think of Patrick Carnes when he wrote the book Out of the Shadows, which I think is just a great book on addiction, understanding it. That book is actually about sexual addiction, but you can lay it on any other addiction. It makes sense. But it's one of the things I've used his what he talked about with addicts, and I've never had an addict ever tell me I was wrong. And it's that confusing world of the addict where we loathe ourselves. We know that we are lovable, and so what we do is we isolate, and one of the ways we do that is we push away the people who we know are good for us, because we know that we're going to hurt them eventually, and so they're going to abandon us. But at the same time, that's the last thing they want, is abandonment. And so we fight very hard to push people away, but yet at the same time, it's the last thing we want. And so for families, for you out there listening, for families of addicts, you know this, you experience it. It's very hard and very difficult. And so I hope that, again, for us that are family members, please, you are more than welcome to be with NorthStar Community. In fact, actually, I think in some ways you're the people we want there to help the others understand. So with that, we talked about a lot about trauma and abandonment in there. And one of the things that comes from the trauma and abandonment is the shame that we build up about ourselves. And so what we do is I take this from Dr. Tversky's book, Addictive Thinking. He talks about the porcupine index. And we work very hard to push people away. But what we do is we allow people in just enough to know our names, maybe. They might see a smile and laugh, those kind of things, but you're never going to get to know me, and I'm never going to show you who I really am. Well, that all works well, right?
It does.
But the problem is we become very lonely and very isolated, and it doesn't work. And so I think today we're going to talk about, I think this is where we kind of lead into boundary discussion. Lisa's been leading our boundaries discussions on Wednesday nights at 6:30, which I haven't plugged that yet, so I guess I should do that. So if you are here in town, you are more than welcome to attend the boundaries discussion. It's a very small group of people, very interested in recovery, and we meet up in the front of the church, so park in front of the church for that. And so Lisa's been leading boundaries for a while, and I think you started it out thinking it was a good idea, but now I think you see it as indispensable in some ways.
Yeah, and we've done it a couple of years, and every time we get more and more stuff from it, so.
Right. Yeah. So Lisa is in recovery herself. I'll leave to you what you want to tell, not tell, or any of that part. But Lisa's in recovery, just like we all are, and doing a great job leading the boundaries group. And I think probably one thing that's helped, I always joke about is that I get the most out of Friday nights being the leader. I mean, I learned so much about the subject because I have to know it, and I'm sure that my life is so much better because of all the knowledge I've gained, and I'm guessing you would say the same about boundaries.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I don't mind sharing a little bit about my recovery. I am in recovery from lots of things, dealt with a lot of abuse when I was a child, sexual abuse, neglect, lots of things continually through childhood that destroyed my boundaries, left me with the inability to connect with people in a real way. So this boundary work is indispensable, along with NorthStar and working out the wounded self. That all helps put this boundary work into action. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So before we start talking about boundaries, let's share a real quick scripture. This is Psalms 23, and this is from the Message Bible. Investigate my life, O God. Find out everything about me. Cross-examine and test me. Get a clear picture of what I'm about. See for yourself whether I've done anything wrong, then guide me on the road to eternal life. And that fits so well when we think about boundaries. Because boundaries, I think we would say, is a fairly difficult subject. Boundaries, I think, make sense. When you hear about it, we need to set boundaries so we can protect ourselves, have good relationships, but it certainly is hard to do.
It is. It is hard to do. Understanding what boundaries means. Understanding where we end and where somebody else begins is a really difficult thing. Figuring out, am I loving people or am I not loving people when I make these choices is all really difficult stuff to do. Friday night at NorthStar, we talked about boundaries, and it becomes a foreign subject. What does this even mean? When we have lived with others, parents, family members, relationships who had poor boundaries themselves, we just don't learn what is a healthy way to interact. Right. Yeah. So.
Well, and when we talk on Fridays about the one, I always tell people who don't come to NorthStar, I said, if there's one subject that does get us, we're very supportive in that, right?
Yes.
We're very supportive. But if there's one subject that probably gets us antagonistic with each other, is when does supporting stop and enabling begin?
Absolutely.
When do we quit helping and when do we start hurting?
Yes.
When do we stop functioning in a healthy manner and over-functioning in an unhealthy manner? And isn't that really what boundaries is about?
It's absolutely boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why is it so hard to set boundaries?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the main reason that it's hard to set boundaries is because we want to be loved and we don't want to be rejected or abandoned. I mean, I really think it all comes down to that. we don't set boundaries because we don't want to make people upset. We don't want them to leave us. We don't want them to reject us. We don't want them to withdraw from us. We don't want them to think that we are mean or that we're irresponsible. And then also, we don't want to take responsibility. That's another thing. You know, a lot of boundaries are about taking care of ourselves and owning our stuff. You know, you set a boundary and then you're on your own. You got to fix it. Yeah. You got to take care of it. You got to face all this stuff. So lots of reasons. A lot of it, I think, comes down to fear, which is the opposite of love. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
So fear is the opposite to love. Makes a lot of sense. I think about when we talk about the wounded self. So true self basically says, if you really got to know me, you would love me. Yeah, I got things to work on, but you would value me. And because I value myself, I can set boundaries. And because I can set boundaries, then I can trust people enough to meet my needs if I tell them what I need. And then, you know, God really becomes what we're focused on as opposed to the other. But the wounded self says, you are not lovable as you are. If you really got to know me, you wouldn't like me at all. So what does that do? That tells me I'm not important. So because I don't feel like I'm important, I can't set boundaries. So guess what? I get in all these dysfunctional relationships, and I already dislike myself a lot if I'm addicted. And so then I just continue to go down that track and say, well, all these people have harmed me, all these people have hurt me, and then my addictions become my master. And so we really have a choice to make here between wounded self and true self.
we do. And you know, it's a perfect intro into the sort of congruence that we talked about. Wounded self versus true self. It's really what it all comes down to. It's really what our relationship with God, with Christ comes down to. Before we come to Christ, all humans are sort of wounded, broken, stained, right? And then we come to him and we're clean and we are forgiven and we're whole. You know, we're our true selves. So God called us to love in freedom. He calls us to love and freedom and have abundant life. And within that are the rules of boundaries. You have to be congruent. So your internal stuff has to be the same as your external.
Oh, that sounds hard.
It is, especially when you're wounded. You know, and boundaries is about truth telling. It's about what's on the inside, and am I going to speak it, and am I going to live it? Most people want to take care of themselves. Most people want to make good decisions. Most people want to be not addicted. Most people want to not be harming themselves with all these choices and behaviors. But for so many reasons, they aren't living that on the outside because of fear, because of shame. You know,
and like you said earlier, because of bad role modeling, too.
Right.
I always, you know, we have dark humor sometimes in NorthStar, and I always talk about most of us in this room who were traumatized and abandoned probably were not in families where you sat down together at 6 p.m. and your parents asked you how you were feeling, and they were apologizing for some of the things they did wrong, and they hoped that you really felt loved. That doesn't happen. No. So boundaries really are a foreign language.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You don't know how to express what's on the inside. You know, boundaries, we discussed it, you know, Friday night. When you're not speaking your truth, when you're not speaking maybe the no that's inside, no, I don't like this, no, I don't want this to happen, or whatever's on the inside, when you're not speaking that, you're really manipulating everyone around you. You're manipulating yourself, you're manipulating the circumstances, you're manipulating everyone around you, and that's part of the porcupine index. We do that to keep ourselves safe. You know, I'm only going to get this close, I'm only going to be this real, I'm going to make sure I don't, you know, say no so that you don't. So when we're being compliant, when we don't have boundaries, we're really sort of living a lie, which goes hand in hand with addiction. It's really, I mean, having poor boundaries is really the only way to get through addiction.
Yeah, and don't you think when we don't set boundaries, we really create a lot of resentment towards others and ourselves?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's one of the laws of boundaries that we talk about, which is, when you are not being congruent, when your insides are not what your outsides are doing, or your insides are not what, you really are, you're really just lying. You're really just creating resentment. So you can't draw this line. You can't say no. So you take on all this stuff and then you're resentful. It's the people, and I know you all have heard this, and I know probably a lot of you have said it. I just love too much.
Or I could
I
love
just
them to
love
help.
too much. I just give too much of my heart. I'm just too empathetic. And it's gotten me in trouble. No, you don't have good boundaries.
Yeah, that's hard to hear.
Yeah, it is hard to hear.
Yeah.
It is hard to
Yeah,
hear.
I always tell, a lot of times when I'm working with people individually, and they're obviously having issues with people addiction, I always go, isn't it amazing how powerful you are? That you think you can you can control other people by withdrawing your emotions or over functioning and all these, and people hate to hear that, but it's true.
Yeah, the other thing that we hear a lot that is a sign of poor boundaries, and, been there a million times, right, is, what other choice do I have? What other choice did I have? I had no choice. We always have choice. Now, some of those choices can be excruciating and incredibly scary, but we do have the choice to take care of ourselves and to live our truth and take care of ourselves.
Yeah, I heard one person who, I was an author, was writing about, she had significant addiction to people issues, and she said, I actually thought when I told someone no, the earth would stop rotating on its axis. Yeah. That's how we awfulize it.
Yeah, and boundaries, there's rampant boundary issues within the church, among Christians. There's so many sort of myths about what it means to love. Yeah. So many people think that confrontation means that you don't love, or means that you're being mean, or something has gone awry if there's any sort of conflict or confrontation, and that's just not the case. It's certainly not how God operated. He confronted.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely was not codependent.
No, held everyone accountable in love. Yeah.
Hate that thing. So, this leads nice segue. So tell us about the myths of boundaries.
Yeah, so there are lots of myths that we learn from our families. We learn from church. We learn from, just sort of our own developed protections, systems. So one is selfish, that if I draw boundaries, I'm being selfish. And within these myths, I think it's important to say, boundary problems usually present themselves in two ways. Either somebody that doesn't have good boundaries, they aren't able to draw and set limits, and then those people who have walls up, brick walls up, that don't let anybody in. So one gets trampled on, one can't let love in. Most people are brick walls.
Yeah, and again, what I see too is I always, like when I'm working with couples, I'll say, I see we have another example of trauma has met trauma.
Yes.
Which is code for boundaries aren't being set very well. And it falls under those two categories.
Yeah, and the brick wall and the one who lets those walk all over them and can't say no are usually a really, really happy couple. So yeah, one of the first myths is selfish, that if I draw boundaries, I'm selfish. And a lot of Christians feel this way. They don't want to be self-centered. They don't want to be, unchristian. They don't want to, a lot of spouses feel that way. Mothers, parents of children who are dealing with addiction or bad behavior. A lot of people feel that way. But you're actually able to be more caring and more loving when you have boundaries. Selfishness is fixated on your own needs at the exclusion of everybody else. But harming people with your boundaries, or maybe making them uncomfortable with your boundaries, isn't selfish. And it's sort of like stewardship. God gave us these lives, right? You think of it like a store manager. We're supposed to manage the shop. And we're supposed to do it in a good way. And sometimes we have to make difficult decisions when we're managing our lives and our souls the way God wants us to do it. And others may not like it, but in the end, it will cause us to be more loving. It will cause us to be able to, connect more with people. So that's selfishness. Also disobedient. People look at boundaries as disobedient. You're not doing what you should, the shoulding all over ourselves, right? I should be this way, I should be that way. And this is really where the internal no nullifying the external yes comes in, right? When we're just compliant and sort of lying and manipulating, we're not really sharing our truth. On the inside, we're just doing what we think we need to do to get by or to make the situation better, right? But that's disobedient to what God calls us to be. He calls us to tell the truth that's in us. He calls us to be authentic. He calls us to love and freedom. When we're not drawing boundaries, we're not being obedient. Or if we're not drawing boundaries, we're being disobedient, not when we draw them.
And I think that's important to hear for us as Christians, because I do think we confuse that one.
We do. It's very common. The other one is that I'll be hurt by others if I draw boundaries. So we're always trying to protect ourselves, right? I mean, that's a pretty common theme among those of us who are addicted or who have hurts, habits, and hang-ups. It's all about protecting.
Well, and if I jump in, the problem with us when we're addicted or in our addictive thinking is we push away the healthy people and we invite in all the unhealthy people we can find. And then we get hurt over and over, and we confuse boundaries in that if with just people are going to hurt me no matter what.
Yeah, and that speaks to a basic boundary sort of fundamental, which some people may find helpful. Boundaries should be like a property that has a fence and a gate. It shouldn't be a brick wall. And it shouldn't be no boundary. If you have to take care of property, but you don't know where those lines are, then you can't take care of that property. But brick walls stop everything. They stop everything. The fence with the gate, you open up and you let in the good, and you close it and don't let in the toxic. And that's really how we have to.
So that's a good analogy. So it makes it a more transparent, safer boundary.
Yeah. So I will be hurt by others when I draw boundaries. And it's one of the hard things when we learn about boundaries is we will have people react negatively to us. Okay, there are going to be some people who are angry that we draw lines, and that we start to take care of ourselves, and we start to maybe find our separateness, right? Separateness is something that is really tough for people who are broken, but we do have separateness, and we have to embrace that. But so people will react negatively, and it's something that we have to be strong enough to deal with. I mean, you have to have a relationship with God to be able to, to do this, to draw the boundaries. There's an example of the man on the road, which you talked about a couple of times ago. God sort of set boundaries out for him. Hey, here's what you got to do if you want to have an abundant life. You got to leave all your stuff and go. And the man went away sad. And God didn't stop him and, hey, well, it's okay. Look, just come on. Well, maybe not all your stuff. Maybe you don't have to get rid of all your stuff. Maybe your barns, you can keep all the, whatever. No, God just told him what he needed to do, and then he let him walk away sad. So again, setting limits is about truth-telling. People aren't going to always like the truth-telling. It's tough for us and it's tough for others. Habitual behavior to avoid pain. We are all trying to manipulate to avoid pain. We don't want to see others in pain. We don't want to deal with discomfort. It's just not the way God operated. If we're going to be free, we're going to have to learn to sit with discomfort.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
Until you get some foundation under you.
Yeah, and the people will hurt you. The other important thing is, and this is something we discuss in NorthStar all the time, is You cannot make people stay. You can't make people love you. You cannot manipulate and sort of dance and sort of sugarcoat through your life and have actual love and connection. Right. You can't make it happen, right? Boundary setting, fortunately and unfortunately, really is a litmus test for true relationship. It clarifies.
And don't you think healthiness, the
yeah,
healthiness level
yeah,
of your
clarifies,
recovery?
Yeah, what's healthy and what's not. So, yeah.
Well, we can't forget when we're addicted and our addictions have taken over, we don't know what the word healthy is.
No.
We don't even remotely know what healthy means. So in our closing moments here, what would you like to help us make sure we understand about boundaries?
Yeah, again, I think the most important thing is really about truth telling. We spend so much time, like I just said, trying to sort of protect ourselves. A lot of us have had violations and neglect of our souls. God really cares about our souls. He cares more about our souls and our freedom than our comfort, And that's what boundaries is all about, this boundary work. And that's what NorthStar is all about. He loves us. He loves us enough to let us be uncomfortable. A lot of people deal with anger around boundaries. And sometimes anger is the only thing that we had to protect us. We have learned ways to survive. We have learned ways to not get ourselves hurt. That porcupine index. We've learned how to be involved but not connected. Just keeping ourselves safe. It's what it's really all about. But safe is not what God intended us to have here. I've spent a lot of time trying to get out of survivor mode and actually, live abundantly and live connected. And it's tough. But again, God calls us to it. He calls us to love and freedom. He calls us to be connected. He calls us to be uncomfortable truth tellers. And that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're doing. We're working through it on Wednesday night together, learning how to be more authentic, learning how to deal with the discomfort. And it's working. For many people, it works, but it's a process. So
it takes time.
It takes time.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time, yeah.
So we always candidly talk about the 3 rules of getting healthy, and so we make sure we understand. We say healthy people, we mean people who care about, people who set boundaries. That's what we're really talking about. People who are willing to give us feedback, support us, and give us feedback, and not just agree with us. And so the rules we have is, you got 3 rules here to overcome addiction. One is get healthy people in your life. If that doesn't work, try rule number 2, get healthy people in your life. And if those first 2 don't work, try rule number 3, get healthy people in your life. You cannot, I told someone the other day, 100% factual statement, I have never met anyone recover by themselves. So boundaries is so critical for us to recover.
Yeah, and healthy people isn't necessarily perfect people.
Correct.
But it's truth tellers. They're people who want to be truth tellers, and are working on it.
So thank you, Lisa, for being here. This is very informative. Boundaries is such an important subject for all of us, and a difficult one. And I think we don't want to lose what Lisa just said about it's a process. We might set a boundary, and then we may not set boundaries. We might set 2 boundaries, and maybe a little. Eventually, we get where we'll set more boundaries. And look, I think the goal, at least initially, is to set enough boundaries eventually that you can start really having some real trusting relationships.
Yeah, and the knowledge is power here. Really, even if we are not walking out this boundary stuff well, or we're stumbling through, we at least have the knowledge of what we need to do and maybe why we're miserable. And that enough. A lot of people come to God, a lot of people get into recovery, they stop drinking, or they get into a relationship with Christ, but they're still miserable. Why? Well, because there's a lot of stuff that has to be undone.
Yeah. And that's what we're doing. We're undoing a lot of childhood stuff. So with that, let's close with the prayer of serenity. And again, I thank all of you for listening in. If you ever want to call me, you can call me at 804-746-5081. You can email me at csimpson@wgva.church. So let's close with the prayer of serenity. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can,
and the
wisdom to know the difference, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that Jesus will make things right if I surrender to his will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today.